Welcome back to the podcast. We have a really special guest today. So, Andy, the RD on Instagram, Andy is a private practice dietitian and 11 times published author from Toronto, Canada. He combines his love for one-on-one interaction with a broader passion to be involved in content creation via his writing and social media, mostly Instagram use. Having been a generalist early in his career, Andy has spent the last several years focusing on the fatty liver space, given the broad prevalence and significant health implications of this increasingly common condition. So, welcome to the podcast, Andy.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to chat. Big fan, as you
Same
know.
here. Can you believe I was thinking the other day, I guess we met 4 years ago? Was it 3 or 4 years ago? I don't know.
I wouldn't be surprised if it was that long. The time goes by so quick. You know what I mean? It
Yeah.
goes so quick, and that's wild to think.
Yeah. So Andy is the reason why we have such a great blog. He was my writing coach
That's
when
funny.
I first started out blogging. So yeah, and you've published 11 books, 11 cookbooks.
Yes.
Are they all cookbooks?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would just describe them as like they're half informational and then half recipes. So they're just really practical. You know what I mean? You're not getting like earth-shattering, contrarian views on topics. You're just getting fundamentals for someone who wants to, start resolving the problem that the book addresses. And the fatty liver book was my last book, and that kind of leapboarded me, if that's the expression, like that into this whole world, right? So I started
Wow.
researching that in like I think late 2021, early 2022, and it just captivated me since for the most part.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, so we are going to talk about today the liver. So I polled on Instagram last week, and as I was watching some of your posts come up on Instagram, I thought this is fascinating, really interesting. And I asked Instagram, would you all be interested in hearing kind of more about that? And was surprised to know that even though we don't ever talk about it on ours, that a lot of people were really wanting to know more about it. And with IBD, so we we often don't think as focus much on the liver, but a lot of people can have overlapping conditions like PSC, primary sclerosing cholangitis, fatty liver, whether that be from medication or just having an IBD diagnosis. And kind of what we know about it, so 30% of those with IBD can kind of come back on a regular basis with abnormal liver tests. So this is why they check for that often. And about 5% may develop fatty liver. So it's a good conversation to have on how we can take care of our liver and kind of getting to know a little bit more about what information is out there, what nutrition looks like for fatty liver disease and just general liver health. So I'm excited to chat about it with you because I've seen Danielle too. We've both been chatting about all your nice posts coming out lately.
And Andy, I think you were maybe one of the OGs that I followed on Instagram, like a dietitian OG. So I know you've been doing this for a long time, and I'm so glad that you are because you put out such great information. But first, we really want to know too is, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you got started as a dietitian?
Yeah, it's a fun question. I was someone who, in my teenage years, did not pay much attention to food or nutrition. And as a result, I wasn't in the best health. My skin wasn't the best. I maybe wasn't like the happiest individual that I could have been. And then I started meandering into caring about nutrition, but it was a really convoluted path, as it is for someone who's just trying to figure things out. And I came to the realization that first of all, that I think that interacting well with food positively influenced my life, but that the path I had to take was excessively hard. So how I see myself today and the role I've always wanted to fulfill, and I'll tell my clients, like my job is like, look, it's very hard to get mastery, and I know you guys appreciate this with the timelines with IBD to get better, but I see my job as condensing an otherwise potentially long timeline to increasing someone's comfort around food, right? So, and that's all because of how it was for me. And so it's a cliche, a lot of times you hear in the health industry, you hear people, I have this issue, so I want to help people fix this issue. And that's really what it was for me. Yeah, I went to nutrition school and all that fun stuff, and here we are.
Do you happen to know, like with the general population, what the incidence is of liver disease?
Yeah, so I think like the numbers that I've seen, you're looking at around 1 in 3 global adults. Now, there's variation geographically and otherwise, and fatty liver disease is by far. And look, the terminology is in the process of changing, but for the sake of people under like really acknowledging and knowing what terms we're talking about, I will call it non-alcoholic fatty liver disease today, because they may not know some of the newer scientific terms, MASLD and so on. But yeah, you're looking at 1 in 3 if we just want to put a simple number on it, which is pretty significant.
Yeah, that is much, much more than I thought. Wow.
And I view it, and I know we'll talk about this, but I view it really like I think as it gains notoriety, I think liver health is a good proxy for, let's say, just like general health and general balance in the diet. Because if fat accumulates on the liver, it's a broad sign that can affect a lot of people that maybe things aren't going quite right. And it's a signal to the person, okay, maybe it's time for a trajectory shift, and because it affects enough people, it then compels enough people to make a positive change, potentially. That's kind of how I look at it.
Yeah. So when you get someone who's just got like a brand new diagnosis, do you have like a starting point or something that you generally start with?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I have fundamental principles from the nutrition side, potentially from the supplemental side, but it really depends where the individual's at, right? What is their level of competence? What are they doing on a regular basis right now? What are their limitations? So it's nothing particularly novel that everyone has to do this one thing. It's about filling in the gaps and going from there.
Yeah. So we know you just started a brand new course. So is it called Liver Fighters? Is that right?
Yeah, I call it just for the fun of it. I called it Fatty Liver Fighters. Just I could as a liver graphic with a sword. Really, just wanted to do that. So keep it fun, keep it
Yeah,
lighthearted because people get scared about stuff like this. So
yeah, we share that sort of approach because we also really value keeping it light and funny sometimes, and because yeah, it is really hard when you get a new diagnosis like that, and some people need something that's less clinical and more like a lighter approach to everything. So it's great that you do that. Have you always
yeah.
used humor like that, like since the beginning, or has that been anything new that's evolved over time?
Yeah, well, it's been an evolution for me because I started on social media, kind of tapping into that, kind of being silly a lot, and then as I got older, I kind of just wanted to focus more on science. It's not that I lost my passion for that kind of fun stuff, but I didn't want it to impede with my ability to kind of like my bigger goals and to really share novel scientific insights. And I am actively thinking like, okay, I'd like to inject a little more fun like I used to, but I have to get back into that and see what that would look like. But yeah, I would hope that people who have worked with me will kind of know me as someone who is, on the lighthearted side and can definitely find the fun in things, especially as it relates to nutrition. I know that you guys appreciate this. There's so much negative messaging out there. It'll leave the average person, the quote unquote average person, really feeling, let's say defeated or pessimistic, right? So it's good that we're a force on the other side of that.
Well, 100%. Because right before we jumped on this podcast, I messaged Ashley saying like, because both of us have IBD, I said, oh, great, another thing we need to worry about. But I mean, to reframe that is to think in a way too. It's like, okay, something to be mindful of, something that I do get checked out for because it's recommended people with IBD get yearly tests for their liver. So I'm glad that you have that lightheartedness with the liver and the sword that we can like seek comfort in that. So 100% appreciate it.
Yes, and I'll be honest, this is important. This is one of the most important things that I see that needs to be kind of fleshed out, brought to light, is the fact that people will get a diagnosis of fatty liver. And I guess I could have answered Ashley's question this way. And now that you've actually brought it out here, Danielle, like people will get diagnosed with fatty liver, and due to the nature of the limited interaction with their doctor, just because the nature of a patient-doctor relationship, there's not extensive time in most cases, they'll be told essentially that they have to lose a bunch of weight. They may be told it's not reversible or it's not resolvable, which both are kind of not true because, first of all, I mean, there's ample human trial evidence to demonstrate that certain supplements, physical activity, dietary changes can reduce the two primary metrics, which are liver fat accumulation and liver scarring. Right? I have clients who get fibro scans, they make changes, they get another fibro scan, the two indicators are reduced. Right? So clearly it is resolvable with it to a certain extent. And it's also resolvable without weight loss because, how I see it is that when the doctor says you need to lose weight, What they're really saying is you need to optimize your nutrition, potentially to consider the strategic use of supplements, and then potentially you need to move your body a little bit more. That's the translation I try and tell people. They just don't have maybe the time or the capacity to flesh it out for you in that way. And that's really important because everyone I see, almost everyone, they're burdened by that as the primary marker of success or the outcome of interest is weight. Where I'm more concerned about implementation of my guidance. Because people always want to know markers and outcomes, right? Like, what am I looking at? And it's not always easy to provide that. Again, and I'm sure you guys can appreciate.
Yeah, that's so interesting because that takes them down a completely different path. So, on the one hand, if they don't see a dietitian and they get that kind of news, then they're going down the path of restricting themselves, focusing only on reduced calories, which we know can go too far down that road. And then you're not actually using food as a way to treat it, which is kind of, that's more in line with what you do. So if they get lucky enough to either find somebody like you or get a referral to a dietitian, then they may go down kind of this other path of, actually using food as in a therapeutic way and actually getting good results.
100%. Yeah, I'll tell my clients, not in a self-aggrandizing way, in a matter-of-fact way. You're kind of lucky that you're in this chair with me because I'm going to give you what you need on your terms and offer you the most tranquility going forward possible. You know what I mean? So it is true. And again, and for the exception of you guys do, I have to say it's the same thing. You know what I mean? Because there's a lot of conflicting information and less than savory information out there. And, digestive health, liver health. I think those two conditions, like in my view, one of the reasons I like fatty liver so much and working with it is that I feel like it really compels people, right? I think like someone gets a high blood pressure, high cholesterol diagnosis. I mean, look, there's a level of concern associated with that. When someone hears that they have liver fat accumulation, there's just something about the liver that I find compels people to act and be concerned. I think maybe we build it up to be more than it is in terms of what it does in the body. I mean, it does 500 different roles in the body. It's very important, but I've caught wind of that as well, and that's one of the many reasons that I wanted to get into specializing in this area. On top of that, like the way I view like liver health really is an indication of how well someone is embracing all the different nutritional nuance that exists, exposure to these different unique compounds and different foods, diversity in the diet. It really does require that kind of building towards that perfect harmony in nutrition in terms of how I view it, which is another reason why I like working in that area, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. And Andy, obviously when it comes to health and liver health, there's many things to take into consideration, but is there something that you've noticed in the research and your work with it that's been the most important to include more of for liver health?
Yes. Like for me, like the bigger picture dietary solution is something akin to kind of like a curated Mediterranean diet for the individual, right? So overall Mediterranean diet principles, maybe without the explicit restriction of the things the Mediterranean diet restricts, like dairy, red meat. I mean, there's rules for that, but it's really like, okay, legumes, fish, fatty fish, nuts and seeds, fruits, and then vegetables, and also understanding within those families, there are certain candidates that have above average capabilities to help with the liver, right? So foods that are higher in flavonoids, for example, foods that are higher in prebiotic fiber. And so, for example, again, you talk about vegetables. I've been talking about artichoke recently as something that has, I like to use the term above average capability, just to indicate like, look, this, you don't have to eat this. This alone is not going to fix everything, but it has something more to it, right? So artichoke, for example, has prebiotic fibers high in magnesium, which generally is associated with good liver health. It has unique compounds called flavones, which are found in very few foods. So it's like, okay, vegetables are good, but here are some that have these characteristics which are better. And the prebiotic fiber, because the microbiome and the liver are tightly linked and so on, right? So Mediterranean diet, customized for the individual, prioritizing the fact that certain compounds help more than others. That would be what I would look for. And look, legumes and nuts are underconsumed population wide, so those would be two starting points for me.
Yeah, especially getting beans. I think a lot of times with IBD, we're often afraid of including more, but sometimes you have to start slow, not go full bean soup right off the bat, but starting off small.
Yeah, I mean, curate solutions all day, right? It has to be, so it's one thing to say that you need to eat legumes, but how someone accesses them there's different ways to do that. I mean, it could be a simple case. They have a package of roasted lentils every afternoon for a snack, or it obviously doesn't have to be regimented in that way, but it doesn't have to be cooking with them. There's so many iterations to bring that stuff to life, right? That's the joy of it.
Hmm. Yeah, and I saw you mentioned about capers too. Danielle
Yeah.
and I were talking about this. So maybe talk a little bit about what kind of value capers can add to fatty liver.
Yeah, so I'm learning constantly. Capers weren't on my radar a few weeks ago, or maybe I underestimated kind of what they were. So actually, my interest in capers in terms of making content stemmed from looking into some cognitive health stuff because I do talk about the liver a lot, but fatty liver disease does increase future risk of cognitive issues. So when we can tie those things together, I will. But pretty much, it's simply that there's these flavonoid compounds, quercetin, camphorol, and it seems that people who consume more of them have less cognitive decline as they age. And it just so happens that capers have by far the most amount of both, by far, by significant margin. So it's kind of like a hack in a sense, right? Capers are also high in polyphenols, and polyphenols have all these like cascade of benefits for liver health as well. So I was talking about capers more from the cognitive health perspective, but these compounds do affect the liver as well. They have like anti-inflammatory capabilities. They might help the mitochondria. The mitochondria is associated with liver health, and it's a whole beautiful chain of events there. But a tablespoon of capers a day, I think, would be reasonable guidance for anyone who likes them. Just throw them on whatever, why not?
They're like quite crunchy, aren't they?
So you're speaking with someone who has never had a caper,
Never had
and
a caper.
that's part of my naivety about it. But
Oh,
but nonetheless, it changes nothing about the fact they are quite rich in those compounds.
the ones I've had are not crunchy. Like they're like soft. And aren't they
Yeah,
like
they're like
a
tart.
flower? Are they a flower? I believe they're a flower.
Yeah, I think they're defined as like flower buds. So something to that effect is kind of the terminology. But they're also they're very high in polyphenols. They are for 1 tablespoon, they are low FODMAP for those that it concerns. Um, they're calorically nothing for those who are concerned about something like that. So they are really just a lovely little thing that you can add on for very little effort that over time will be a positive contribution to your diet.
Yeah, so I've used them different ways you could use them. So I've used them on salads before. And you can use them in making like Caesar dressing. Like if you're making something like that from scratch, it often can call for capers. But yeah, they add a
Nice.
nice like pickled, nice peppery flavor to things.
Well,
And
now
super.
now I'm kind of wondering if like the ones that I ate went bad or something. Just because I think like they powered this crunchy thing, but now I'm like, oh gosh, what was I thinking of? What did I use? But
It depends how they
Yeah.
were cooked or the brine they're in or whatever the case may be. But I would say, just from what I've seen, anyone who has an even mild interest in cognitive health, if you like capers, I think you can put a tablespoon on stuff occasionally. And even occasional use will greatly increase your average intake of those compounds, right? So, and quercetin is something I know people are interested in. I haven't really talked about it much, but I see it here and there. Like see here and there on social media in the discourse. And so again, capers are by far the most significant source, right?
Oh, I didn't
So
know
very
that.
fun. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
so
very
guess what I'm getting this weekend at the store.
good. Yeah, in such a small amount too. I think when people think about making changes, they often think about like having to do something really hard. They don't have to think about like just throwing something on a salad or like on whatever you're eating, like something a tablespoon even. Like that's so small, such a small change.
100%. Sometimes I can be hyperbolic. If I have a client in front of me and I really want to I want them to be compelled and energized. I'll say something like, quarter cup of lentils a day like changes everything. I'll use that kind of language. And I believe that genuinely as it relates to like metabolic health. And there's certainly numerous studies that show that that's the case. But yes, I'm a big fan of small changes in the regular inclusion of impactful and underappreciated foods being like revolutionary for someone's health. That's something that is very important to me.
Let's
And
see.
not like emphasized enough, right? Like I feel with all of the fad diets out there and just recently Ashley and I had just some interactions with the carnivore fans. Quite often people feel like they have to do these grandiose things and hey, like flip the switch on that and understand that small changes can go a long way.
100%. I mean, yeah, having spent more time on TikTok recently just to share nutrition information, it is, yeah, I mean, it's what it is. You see the carnivore diet, it's quite prevalent, certainly on TikTok. And I just view that, in my honest opinion, if I had to summarize in a sentence, I view that as people who pursue that are just deferring, kind of confronting the ultimate reality that they have to reconcile their personal nutritional needs and a diverse diet, and they're just deferring facing that potentially at some great expense to their health or mental health in the future. I mean, that's how I view it personally. Not to say that there won't be some people who do it for life, and who knows what that will mean. Really hard to say, but that's how I look at that. And you didn't ask for that. I just wanted to say that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Go on record.
Yeah. Yeah, and you also mentioned pomegranate. So
Yep.
I saw that it can help with lowering lowering liver enzymes, and also with, helping to actually remove the accumulated fat in fatty liver, which is really fascinating.
Yes, I mean so it's tough, right, Ashley, because obviously just having some pomegranate every day in isolation is not going to be sufficient to like revolutionize your liver health. But on the flip side, I mean, we have evidence that it does lower one of the liver enzymes, GGT. And for anyone listening, GGT is the strongest predictor in terms of liver enzymes of liver fat accumulation. It's using a formula called the fatty liver index. So basically, scientists have determined that of any liver enzyme, GGT best predicts the presence of fatty liver. It's not enough to predict it alone, don't get me wrong, but it's the best predictor. So there are studies that show that pomegranate can lower GGT, which is really cool. But it's like when you start stacking the changes, okay, a half a pomegranate in a day, a quarter cup of lentils, a tablespoon of capers, a third cup of pecans. You start to do those things consistently, and then that's when you're going to see differences in your really meaningful differences in any metabolic related test scores. Yeah, so I'm a big fan of pomegranate. I used to be able to get frozen all the time at our local grocer, and I haven't seen it for a while. It's so good. I hope I can get it again soon.
Nice. Yeah, maybe I said that wrong too. So I think you said it supports the healthy mitochondria. Is that right? The pomegranate?
Yeah. No, you got it right. I think I did say the GGT, but yeah, no. What it does? It's actually really cool. I mean, I'll share and then we can talk about it. I mean, so pomegranate and pomegranate juice have a compound called ellagic acid. It's found only in other berries. Well, pomegranate's not a berry, I guess, or maybe it is botanically. I don't know, but it's found in berries and then pecans and walnuts. Essentially, no other foods have any meaningful amount. What happens is your gut microbiome, if it is in a good state, will convert the ellagic acid to something called urolithin A. Urolithin A is known to facilitate like mitochondrial renewal. I'm going to use the term renewal just for the sake of simple language. It's good for your mitochondrial health. And of course, your mitochondria play a role in how your body utilizes fat. So a healthy mitochondria will put your body in a better position not to put fat on your liver where it should not be. So that's obviously a gross oversimplification, but I'm also not a PhD in cellular biology, so I think that'll probably do. But yeah, it's really cool. It's really cool. And if you don't eat those foods, you don't tap into the benefit of that compound. And not to say you have to eat them all the time, but it's all part of it's the joy of diversity and rotation and the inevitable ebb and flow that will happen in someone's diet, right? Like you emphasize this food for a bit, maybe it falls off, you bring it back,
I like what you said about stacking too, because something that often comes up in my conversations with people is they'll say, well, if I do this and my meds, how will I know what worked? Or if I don't I want to just do one thing at a time? But, with nutrition, and with this kind of stuff in general, it's never one thing. It's typically that stacking and the synergistic effect of everything as a whole that makes the biggest difference.
Yeah, that's 100% the case, right? Sometimes I'm speaking with the client, depending on the context, I'll tell people it's helpful to look at things as a 7-day average of the totality of your choices. Let's say if you can have more legumes over 7 days, more of this fit compound over 7 days, like, and so on and so forth. Just to give good information out here, dried parsley is a real hack for liver health. Same thing. Look, you use dried parsley every day. That alone is not going to be enough. However, dried parsley is the single highest source of that compound, that family of compounds called flavones that are also in artichoke. And good evidence that people who consume the most flavones tend to have lower levels of liver fat accumulation. That's the best evidence we have. I know it's not, we're not going to find like experimental trials showing that a tablespoon of parsley a day lowers liver fat. It's obviously not going to be that impactful, but as part of a broader strategy, there's good indication that it's going to be helpful. So that's another daily hack I recommend is to use dried parsley. Yeah, herbs and spices are very powerful, and I'm sure for curcumin, turmeric, I feel like you've talked about that on your page. I know it's the supplemental form, fair enough, but even so.
Yeah.
Trying to think, have we mentioned much of that, Ashley?
We don't talk about it a lot, but I think when you were looking at some of my blogs, I was talking a lot about curcumin. I was very interested in that. Just in the impact of how there's so much research on it. It's one of the most well-researched supplements, and it varies a lot depending on the type, but so much benefits to all over digestive health and cancer prevention and gut stuff. So yeah.
It was one of the blogs I think that we had kind of worked on together.
Yeah, and I like the idea of using more parsley too, like using those herbs, because I don't think we think about that as being super helpful. One, it adds so much flavor to your meal, but two, it's a great way to add in some of those, flavones and flavonoids in the diet without being as problematic for symptoms, because, fairly low in lots of fibers and pretty light option for people with gut issues.
Yeah, no, speaking of trials, actually, I should actually walk back what I said earlier, because there was a study done, I think, in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, where they use like moderate doses of spices, and it resulted in measurable reduction in inflammatory markers. So in fact, you actually can get reductions from using spices more regularly. It's a funny thing, right? Because I'm the person, when I'm at home, I use ample herbs and spices, and the last thing I think about is that they might reduce inflammation or whatever in my body, but I'll be the first person to frame it that way on social media. It is kind of funny how, I don't know if you guys have this, that the personal professional dichotomy of approaching things, but they're not mutually exclusive. They're both like, they're totally related to each other. But urban spice use is obviously wonderful culinarily and like very good for you. So another area to consider if you're overlooking it.
Yeah, no, I'm the same way. I like using a lot of herbs and spices in cooking. And I actually have used parsley in a smoothie too, like with like peaches and strawberries and a little bit of parsley. And it's real good. It wasn't my own idea. I got it from a smoothie place I went to, and I was like, wow, it really adds like a unique, refreshing taste. Yeah.
I don't know how I feel about that, but I'd be definitely willing to give it a try.
Yeah, it's good. Obviously you don't want like a lot of parsley in there, but
smoothies are a good place to put things that you might want to be exposed to that you otherwise have no interest in kind of facing up to in a recipe or somewhere else, right? You can kind of toss it in. For people who make smoothies, stuff like even cocoa powder. You see so much evidence around that for cognitive health, and you throw that in the smoothie, throw some parsley in, and various other things. We can go down the list. You got yourself maybe some ground flax. You got yourself a super shake.
That sounds good.
And like Andy, as you were talking, obviously all of us here are dietitians, we're big fans of plants and fiber and all of that good stuff. But just you speaking about it is just so cool. All of the things that they are packed with to help our health. And I just can't emphasize that enough. Just plants can really do some great things for a person.
Yeah, there's so much. That's why I love teasing out the things that make foods unique. You can find something uniquely beneficial about probably any fruit and vegetable, and what makes it uniquely beneficial might be more relevant to one person or another, depending on their taste, their preferences, and their health concerns. But find great joy in that. And I think it makes sense to talk about, because look, hitting protein requirements are obviously important. That however someone wants to hit that, how they're able to achieve diversity of protein, that's well talked about. That's not a secret. That doesn't need to be hammered home any further, in my opinion. Or maybe it does, or it can be done privately in consultation. So I think this area is probably maybe underappreciated, and I'd like to get people excited about eating these things, eating fruit, which they're otherwise being told for various reasons, not to have or have concerns about, right? And I've got a few messages saying, yeah, I eat more fruit because of your posts. And that's cool, right? Like that's goals, as the kids say, right? So there you go.
Are they still saying that? I'm not sure. But...
Yeah, maybe it's just me then. Maybe it's just me.
Yeah. So for any of you listening that aren't familiar with his work, on Instagram, check out, we're going to link some of your posts on liver health, but It's just so insightful and fun and just could make anybody fall in love with nutrition a little bit, with just how many ways we can use food in a therapeutic way. So it's really cool that you've created that. I do have one more question too, though.
Of course.
So you have Kale in the background of this picture.
Yes.
And when people see your picture that we'll put on social media, you have Kale in your shirt.
Yeah.
So where did your interest in Kale come about, and how did you kind of put it throughout all of your social media too? So tell us about your love of Kale.
Yeah. I have to say something kind of sad first. I don't eat as much kale now as I used to, but I still do eat it with regularity. Well, you know what? I'll tell you this. It kind of ties everything together we talked about today, even about myself personally, and then even professionally, talking about incremental changes. So when I first took an interest in nutrition, when I was in my mid to late teens, I became acutely aware of the fact that I didn't really consume vegetables. But I didn't really like vegetables because I was at that time quite picky. So I needed some sort of path of least resistance to eat more vegetables. So I arrived at this idea that I'm just going to have a bell pepper and like a box of spring mix or some leafy greens, and I'm just going to eat that with dinner every day. That was my rationale and what I decided to act on. And I started off eating spinach, and then there's just a friend of mine who said, "Oh, maybe you should try kale one time because maybe the texture is a little bit different and so on." And I just quite like kale. I eat kale almost every single day in the same habit that I built when I was younger, just as a way to get more vegetables in me. And then maybe in the last year or so, I many other vegetables. Don't get me wrong, but I just moved away from that, diversified it. But I love kale, and yes, it has become kind of like an identity thing. And certainly kale requires some defending. I see all sorts of content on it, bringing it down. So I'll have to think about that. I actually did write a piece for the American Institute of Cancer Research on all the compounds in kale years ago. So that's fun. But
That's neat. We'll have to link that in the notes too. I haven't read that yet. That's awesome.
Yeah, that would be my long-winded answer to my kale joy. This lovely painting is by Toronto artist or print. So I quite like it. It's perfect background.
Yeah, I like it too. So what's your favorite way to prepare kale?
Oh, I mean, I just straight up eat it like that. I'm just like that. Yeah. I'm in the habit of seasoning, pan frying, air frying, roasting vegetables, but I can eat kale just like that, straight up. Yeah, I truly enjoy it. It's not some sort of gimmick or anything. I just truly enjoy it, genuinely.
Yeah.
As unusual as that sounds, I appreciate that, but it's the truth.
And Andy, if people wanted to get the real look of like you and your kale, where would they be finding more information on you? What is your Instagram handle and website?
Yeah, it's DVRD is my Instagram. It's my TikTok, which I'm actually on TikTok quite a bit more now. It's fun to make. I really enjoy the challenge of delivering a kind of concise, meaningful message in like a minute and 30 seconds, right? It's fun. So there, Instagram, TikTok, and my blog is on my website, andydrd.com. Yeah, and that's pretty much it. I've been sharing my graphics on LinkedIn lately, and they actually do okay on there. Funny enough.
Really?
I'm glad I've been doing it because I get a decent response. I built up so many over the years. I would just say this for any of our colleagues, for yourselves. Like if you have graphical or informational content, don't be afraid to share it on LinkedIn. I think you'll be surprised. You could build up a following. You have such exceptional expertise in a very important and complex subject area. So I would suggest you try that, in all honesty.
Yeah.
If you haven't already.
Yeah, we definitely will. No, and maybe it's like a welcome change of pace because LinkedIn has a different vibe, has that like professional, and maybe we need like to break in some fun, insightful stuff too.
And don't get me wrong, I stopped short of posting Fecal Friday content on LinkedIn. But anything short of that, I'm in.
That's great. Yeah, I'll definitely do that. Well, awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here. And where can people find some more information on you and joining your course?
Yeah, the course, Fatty Liver Fighters, it's an online course. It's a community. The links are in my social media, in my Instagram page. The very first link, my website has a dedicated page for it now, where I'll take you through a series of introductory videos. So if anyone's on my website or on my Instagram, and they can obviously contact me if they want more information, they can learn everything they need to know. Yeah, the main thing is really just dispelling the idea that you cannot improve your liver scores, and dispelling the idea that losing weight has to be the center of your universe after diagnosis. I think doing those two things and reframing it will move mountains for people. So
that's solid advice.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Andy.
Yeah, thanks, Andy.
Thanks for having me
back. All right, take care.
Yes, it's lovely chatting.